What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Nebraska Cornhuskers are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Nebraska did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Nebraska. My projection for this team had them at 6-6, and then my prediction for them was 8-4. So I was accurate on the projection, but I was way off on the prediction. I was kind of expecting Nebraska to be like a decent team. Not that they're going to be contending for a Big Ten title or a national championship or anything like that. I was just pretty high on this team with all the production they had coming back, and there was so much hype around this team, of course, going into Matt Rule's second year. But either way, this team did go 6-6. I don't think it was a disappointing year for Nebraska. I think a lot of Nebraska fans probably think this was a disappointing year, but I don't think it was. You know, making it to a bowl game is a big accomplishment, especially after Nebraska's had ups and downs over the course of the years. But if you count their bowl game victory at the end of the season, this team went 7-6 overall last year in 2024 as well. You look at the schedule from last season for Nebraska in 2024, and you look at this non-conference schedule. You look at who they played in the non-conference. They played UTEP, Colorado, and Northern Iowa, so a couple of cupcakes, and then you had the Colorado game out of the Big 12. Of course, Colorado a couple years ago was a member of the Pac-12, and then they, of course, came a member of the, Big 12 from last year. They ended up beating Colorado fairly easily. You know, that was kind of like a big revenge game for Nebraska because they lost to the Buffaloes a couple years ago. So non-conference schedule not tough last year for Nebraska. Then you take a look at their Big Ten games. First off, who they played at home last year. They played Illinois, Rutgers, UCLA, and Wisconsin all at home last year. So they beat Rutgers and Wisconsin at home, but lost to Illinois and also UCLA. And those were kind of close games that Nebraska lost. We know that Nebraska has lost some close games over the last few years now that they can't really win by one possession. But yeah, those were kind of tough losses, but Illinois ended up being really good. They were a surprise team. UCLA just a pretty average team. You know, they didn't make it to a bowl game, but this was a team that, got better down the stretch. Then you take a look at Nebraska's road schedule. They played on the road at Purdue, at Indiana, at Ohio State, at USC, and Iowa. So a very tough road schedule. You know, they beat Purdue, but they lost to Indiana, Ohio State, USC, and Iowa. But they were competitive against Ohio State. The Indiana game was a blowout. USC game, I really can't remember the score of that game. I think it was a close game, though. But yeah, all in all, this was kind of a tough schedule for Nebraska, but they were able to go 6-6 and still make it to a bowl game. Let's now look ahead to 2025. Here is that schedule for Nebraska heading into the 2025 season. Before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Nebraska will play in the non-conference this season. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will, of course, play Cincinnati out of the Big 12. That game, of course, going to be in Kansas City. Yeah, very interesting neutral site non-conference game matchup here between Nebraska and Cincinnati. Kind of anxious to see this matchup. I think the winner of this game probably goes on to have like a, good year, and maybe the loser probably doesn't have like a really bad year, but maybe they don't make it to a bowl game. Let's just put it that way. I don't really know how good the Bearcats are going to be. Nebraska might be the better team here. Let's say that right now. And then you got Akron and HCU. So non-conference schedule pretty similar to last year. One group of 5 team and then one FCS team. And then you got Cincinnati out of the Big 12 this time instead of Colorado. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now take a look at the home schedule in the Big 10 for Nebraska. They will play Michigan, Michigan State, Northwestern, USC, and Iowa. So 5 home games in the Big 10 this year. All very winnable games for Nebraska. Now, Michigan, USC, and Iowa, those will be 3 tough games. I think those are the 3 most important games that Nebraska needs to win on the schedule. And then, obviously, Michigan State and Northwestern, 2 teams that are very winnable games. So, yeah, not a tough home schedule for Nebraska, but you got Michigan, USC, and Iowa. The good news is they are all 3 at home. So that is your home schedule. Let's now take a look at their road schedule for Nebraska. They will play on the road at Maryland, at Minnesota, at UCLA, and then on the road at Penn State. So This road schedule is a little bit tricky. You know, 3 winnable games, though: Maryland, Minnesota, and UCLA. Of course, you lost to UCLA last year, and then you got Maryland and Minnesota. They didn't play either of those 2 teams last year. And then you got Penn State, of course, on the road. Yeah, that's going to be pretty tough. That is the toughest road game here on this away schedule for Nebraska, and probably the toughest game on this schedule either way for Nebraska. So that's your away schedule. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game here for Nebraska. Again, they'll kick things off with Cincinnati on August 28th. That game is going to be on a Thursday in that neutral site game on Kansas City. I'm pretty sure that's going to be at the Chiefs Stadium, if I'm not going to lie. So, yeah, Nebraska will play Cincinnati there on August 28th on a Thursday. Then they get Akron on September 6th, and then you got HCU on September 13th. And then you open up Big Ten play at home against Michigan on September 20th. And then you get a first bye week here before playing Michigan State at home on October the 4th. Then you go on the road for the first time, your first true road game. That Cincinnati game is not really counted as a away game, but they'll play Maryland at Maryland here on October the 11th. Then they got Minnesota on the road here on October 18th. So they got back-to-back road games there with Maryland and Minnesota. 2 very tough back-to-back road games, but again, very winnable games here for Nebraska. And then after that, it's Northwestern at home on October 25th. USC also at home on November 1st. Then it's back on the road. They travel out west to play UCLA on November 8th. And then they get their second bye week before playing Penn State on the road on November 22nd. So I think that's a pretty good spot for that second bye week. You know, you're coming out, that UCLA game out west and everything. It gives you time to recover from the trip, and then also gives you time to prepare for this big game on the road at Penn State. And then they close things out with Iowa at home on November 28th. That game, of course, will be on a Friday. So that is the schedule for Nebraska in 2025. Let's now get into their projection here for the upcoming season. This is the scale I'll be using here for their official projection. Basically, if it's a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much going to count as an automatic loss. 20% games in the orange, that's a percentage that Nebraska will be about a double-digit underdog. And then 40% games in the yellow, they'll be a clear underdog in this percentage by 6 or 7 points. And then 50-50 games, they will stay in the white, games that really can go either way. 60% in the purple, that's where Nebraska will be favored by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. 80% in the blue, they'll be favored by double digits in that percentage. And then obviously the green games, they are counted as wins in the automatic range here at 99%. So we'll start with those easy wins here for Nebraska. And I think you got a couple of them on here pretty easily. Akron and HCU, these are 2 easy wins for Nebraska in my opinion. It would definitely be a big shock if Nebraska definitely lost one of these 2 games, but I just do not see that happening. I know Nebraska has kind of had some close games, in the past against, like group of 5 teams, and maybe they struggle against FCS opponents, but that's not the case. Nebraska is definitely different under Matt Rule, so yeah, they definitely should take care of business in both of those 2 games, and those are definitely games that they'll be favored by 20 plus, and they are definitely over that 95 to 99% range. And then I got a couple of games here where I think Nebraska will be favored by 6 or 7. I don't have any games in the blue where I think they'll be favored by double digits, but I got a couple of games in the purple. Michigan State and Northwestern. Both of those games, they're at home for Nebraska, which does make them the favorite here by 6 or 7 points. But if they were on the road, they would definitely be in that white range. They would definitely be a 50-50 game. But I'm going to say that Michigan State and Northwestern, I think Nebraska will be favored in both of those games. They are not winnable games, but, they're not like guaranteed wins. These are like trap games, in my opinion, even though they're at home for Nebraska. Again, I think they'll be favored by 6 or 7 in both of those games. So yeah, those 2 games, I think they'll be favored by about a touchdown and somewhere in that range. And then we got one game on here where I think Nebraska is going to be an underdog in. They're not in the red or the yellow, but it's in the orange, and that's going to be the road game against Penn State. Look, I know this game's in the month of November. Upsets usually do happen, and we saw Nebraska last year compete with Ohio State on the road in a tough environment. But yeah, Penn State, there's a lot of hype around this team. They have a lot of talent coming back on both sides of the football, and I just don't think Nebraska will be definitely able to keep up with Penn State. Their running game probably too strong, and maybe defense is too strong as well. Plus, the reason why this game came out in the orange is because it's on the road. That is a very tough place to play that Nebraska has to go up against, and it's also after playing out west to UCLA. But they get a bye week, obviously, so maybe the bye week does help them out, but I think Penn State clearly is the more talented team, so I think Nebraska will be a double-digit underdog by 10 to 14 points. And then that leaves you with 7 total 50-50 games. You got Cincinnati, Michigan, Maryland, Minnesota, USC, UCLA, and Iowa. These are all 50-50 games that I think can really still go either way. Cincinnati obviously is a neutral site. That's the reason why it came out to be a 50-50 game. Michigan, because it's at home, that's the reason why it's a 50-50 game. And I think Maryland and Minnesota, those are pretty even matchups. Same thing with USC, UCLA, and then Iowa. Maybe Iowa is more talented than Nebraska, but that game is at home, so that's the reason why it does fall in the 50-50 range. So what does the projection come out to be here for Nebraska for 2025? Well, we count the green games as wins, and then you average out those 2 games in the purple at 60%. Then you count the orange game as a loss there against Penn State, and then you average out all 7 of these 50-50 games. I think they can at least win 4 out of the 8. I think they probably win 4 50-50 games, then lose 3 50-50 games, and then also they probably slip up in one of those purple games. So that's going to give you like a total of 7 wins, including the 4 50-50 games and then also the 2 green games. So you win one of those purple games, that's going to give you a total of 7 wins, and that is what the projected record is for Nebraska. It is 7-5 for 2025. I think that's a pretty fair projection. The schedule does set up for Nebraska to give them a chance to probably still make it to a bowl game. I think worst case probably is still making it to a bowl game barely at 6-6, and then best case is probably 8-4. But it would definitely be a big shock if Nebraska did go like 5-7 or 4-8. If they were able to do that and lose some of those close games like they've been in the last few years, then yeah, Nebraska might lose out on a bowl game, to be honest. But as of right now, I think this schedule does give them a chance here to make it to a bowl game at least, because it's pretty balanced, and I don't really think I see any tough stretches on here for Nebraska either. So yeah, 7-5 is what the projected record is for Nebraska. Do you guys agree or disagree? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and also give me your thoughts on Nebraska's schedule for 2025. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.